So something I've wanted to talk about for a long time is manning up. Also, I think it's a great time to talk about men and mental health. These two things go hand in hand, and I've been saving this manning up video just for when I felt like it, because I've been thinking about it for like over a year and a half. Ever since I started vlogging, it was something, I did like a similar video that was a 2-cent rant just about gender roles and how stupid they are, but I really wanted to get into a more formal conversation. I shouldn't say well, I guess the 2-cent rant is less formal than a conversation. But it's not like I sat around and wrote notes for this or anything. It's just a lot of my feelings from my experiences and other people's experiences around me and what I see and live through. I don't want to just like get all up into like the terms toxic masculinity and everything else, but there's a negative culture that's being handed down by a lot of men to their children. I think that manning up and that stereotype for men, that gender role, is also passed down through women. Like, I think that anyone who believes it can perpetuate it, even if they're not living it as a man who is expected to do those things. It could be a woman or a little child, a girl, a toddler, whatever, who is imposing those roles and stereotypes and rules and everything else to a boy or a man or whatever. So I definitely think it's harmful for everybody, this man up attitude. And I want to say that I recognize that obviously people of all genders and non-conforming to gender, etc., have issues that go along, I think, with that, with the fact that we even have labels and terms for defining certain things like sex and gender and what we attach to that, and those things can obviously be harmful. And this is one that I think has been around a long, long, long time, and it happens just to fit into the gender binary as well. And I do want to talk about it because I feel like there's some distinctions. Specifically, I'm just going to talk about men and women, even though I'm very aware and respect and recognize that there are multiple, there's a gender spectrum, put it that way, which includes people who are non-conforming to gender. So, there's a meme picture here that I want to throw in here that Randy shared just recently, so here it is. That's part of the reason that I decided to have this conversation today. I've thought about it other times and I really wasn't in the mood, and then she posted that, and I was like, hey, I am in the mood for this conversation right now, and that is what sparked it, so thank you, Randy. It's one of these things that I feel, there's too many different directions to go into. So I feel like stereotypes, when they reach a certain point, or I don't know, that point is really early on, that they're not positive, they're not good. Labels are for soup. But I mean, like, there's things that we attach to words. Words have meaning. However, some words carry a lot of weight, and they're a label, and they designate and define someone in a way that they shouldn't. You know what I mean? Like, whether it be a race and culture or whatever, and certain things go along with that have nothing to do with it, or whether it be gender or sex of a person, you know, certain things even with age. Like, it's just one of those things that culturally we attach certain things to that, and like, teenagers are all lazy. I disagree. I mean, there's a lot going on biologically with a lot of teenagers, but are all teenagers lazy? No, obviously not. Are all boomers this way, or all millennials or Gen X people this way? No. There's discrepancy and allowance for nuance and complexity of the human spirit and everything else. Their context, their nature, their nurture, blah, 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 blah. So, sometimes we attach certain labels, stereotypes, trying to define people, and it carries tons of weight. So, this notion of manning up. obviously very related to mental health, specifically of men. Again, this transfers over to every area with humans. It's depending on culturally too. But if we're especially talking about like Western, society, especially North America, or even just U.S. and Canada. I mean, there's obviously other places that have this going on as well. This cultural thing of like manning up. What do I mean by manning up? I mean that you're supposed to be able to push through. You're not supposed to be open or vulnerable or showing emotion. That you're supposed to just like, just keep it inside, not communicate, or not only communicate in certain ways, right? That is a man being stoic, and being stoic has a limit, I feel, and there's a certain point where you cross that line and it becomes harmful to yourself. And if it becomes harmful to yourself, it's probably going to be harmful to those around you. Good example is with me. So if I want to talk about being aggressive or assertive or passive, I am not assertive. That's something I want to work on, is being assertive. I am not passive either. So what's left? I'm generally a very aggressive person or a passive-aggressive person. Both of those things include aggression. There are times where I get awkward and I don't know how to handle a certain situation. I haven't really been taught how to be assertive, and trying to teach myself and train myself to be assertive, and that it's okay to say things. And I don't know, there's times where I'm scared to say things because I don't know how far the situation will go. I don't want to end up necessarily in a physical confrontation if I can avoid it, and especially in those situations with other men that might lead up to that, or even with women who perceive me as just a man of color, a bigger guy, all these other things that could be attached to me being aggressive, when in that moment I have no intention on doing that, but I just want to tell somebody, hey, example, simple things like, hey, this is not an off-leash park, and you should have your dog on a leash. Simple things like that. I've had people get aggressive with me over saying something like that. There's been other examples too where I want to be assertive and not be scared to be assertive, because I definitely don't have any fear in being aggressive in certain scenarios. Other scenarios I just shut my face. But this is one of those things of that it's seen that it's the norm for me to be aggressive, or that men who are aggressive, it would make more sense, and whatever else, and testosterone and whatever else. And it's just well, this is learned behavior, this is cultural, this is taught, that these expectations have some sort of allowance, and then depending on who you spend more time with, you realize, okay, well, no, that's not cool, that's not the way to be, and you try to break these cycles, right? But they're in this huge structure. And it's one of those things that I feel, a huge difference on the expectation of women on if they're aggressive, then it means all these things over here and whatever else. But in my daily life, I would like to be more assertive. I would like to be able to communicate things in a way that is proper and can be heard in a proper way and respected. And it's really difficult for me to do that. Again, as I'm naturally not naturally or nurtured to be aggressive, and there is something naturally in me that just is a little more aggressive, that plays along with this passionate part of me that I need to maintain and control and realize when I can let that come through and when I shouldn't. I'm a very, very expressive person, so I don't have a lot of problems keeping things in and bottling them up as much as other people do. I would say not as much as the average man would have trouble with that. Or maybe they don't have trouble with it because they just don't do it, period. It's just a zero thing. It just doesn't happen. Therefore, there's no struggle. But I definitely do it more, I think, than the average person, is expressing myself either with my partner and trying to communicate and be understood, etc., have conversations, or just through art and expressing my feelings and putting it out there for anyone to look at. That's just who I am, and I like to think of that as a gift. I really enjoy being expressive. How that gets perceived from other people, that's a whole different thing. But I still have problems with communicating things in an appropriate way sometimes. When I want to be open and vulnerable, or when I need to say things or whatever, then sometimes that is coming out too aggressive, and it shouldn't be coming out aggressive, but I do want that thing expressed, so it becomes difficult. Other times I feel like I don't know how to express it in a proper way, so I just don't express it. And then I sit with it. It's very rare that I do that because I'm a very expressive person. But when I do it, it is a very negative impact. It's very detrimental to me and those people around me. And I recognize that. I'm very aware of it. Having this expectation specifically of one gender just I don't think benefits anybody in any capacity. I'm going to say we, I think that, Canada, United States, some Western societies, etc., expect women to be weak. We expect them to cry over stuff we don't think is worthy of crying about, or expressing their weakness. In ways that we might roll our eyes over or just be like, oh my goodness, but we don't tell them to man up or woman up or like, you know what I mean? After a certain point, there's, like humorous tropes of like, get yourself together and like whatever, but it's generally a thing that I don't think is applied in the same way. Again, women have their own issues. Like there's plenty of stuff going on there that I acknowledge, and there's gender roles I think hurt everybody, absolutely. But again, I just want to be talking about specifically manning up and men and mental health right now, because they're expected to express things more, and then we consider that nagging and whatever else. Like because they're expected to talk more and show weakness more, I feel like in some ways that leads to them being more at times balanced emotionally than we'd like to think. Because there is this stereotype of women being very irrational and blah, 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 and not, part of it is like, oh, well, when you're on your period and like whatever, that time of the month, and your hormones are going all whack, yes, that's a thing that there's some biology to some stuff and chemical, changes that are happening that definitely make things more difficult and whatever. But in general, I think it's just like this stereotype that women are more irrational. And I would venture to say that at times I feel like women might end up being a little... There's a lot of different stressors and a lot of different anxieties. So maybe it's unfair for me to say that I think sometimes women can have an opportunity to be more mentally healthy, but I just mean in this one aspect that we allow them without much shame to be expressive, to cry, to show weakness and be vulnerable, and that's what we expect from women generally. And we don't hold that expectation with men. There's unhealthy ways to be vulnerable. There's unhealthy ways to cry if you use it as a weapon. There's unhealthy ways to express emotion, right? Like, there's a balance. It's something that should be learned, taught, discussed, that there are proper ways and improper ways to do things, and for your own benefit and your health, as well as those around you. These are things that I believe can be learned. And again, discussed openly. So, again, I feel like I'm more expressive than the average man, but I still have a very difficult time being vulnerable. I don't want to be taken advantage of. I don't want to be seen as weak. I think I am more open and vulnerable, again, than maybe the average man in my similar context within age and how I grew up and where I grew up and all those things. And I still find it to be a problem. I still find that it affects my mental health. I still find that there is expectation and weight on me and stereotypes and things that I cannot fulfill. And when I don't, it's negative and it means something negative and it's not appreciated and it's not acceptable and it becomes a point of contention among people and whatever else. I want to dive right into the deep end right now with some stats. And I knew this beforehand, but I didn't look up the specifics until today. But I think this plays into a reason why men are much more likely to commit suicide than women. I did pull up some stats. This is something that I've known about for a long time, and I just believe it plays a huge role. Where we're talking about not being able to express your emotions, just man up and don't talk about it and get through it and blah, 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 blah. It's got to come out somewhere. And it will, whether it be through substance abuse to cope, or whether it be, abusing your partner or your children or other members of your family or yourself with, substances or other negative coping mechanisms. That is not going to be good for your mental health. And if you don't have someone that you feel you could talk to and express things to and whatever else, or you just don't feel like you're allowed to, or you don't feel like that's not what men do, or wherever you are on that spectrum of recognizing the what is being imposed on you by our culture and people around you, it just has a lot of negative effects mentally, emotionally. So the stats that I did look up in some ways were more than I thought. They were more alarming than I thought they were, because the ratio of men to women suicides is almost 4-to-1 in the Americas. I believe it's 3.6 to 1. I thought it was just going to be like double. It breaks it down by like continents, basically, in the stats that I was looking at last, which out of all the ones I looked at, that seems to be accurate and balanced and very well represented, and factual, so well researched. So I believe it was 3.6 to 1 in the Americas, which is just so incredibly high. And for the world, it's 2 to 1, like 2 to 1 over everywhere. And there's some that obviously are lower and some that are higher or whatever. But I mean, it's something that I believe, especially. I mean, the thing is, some places it's less than 2 to 1, because they don't have the same culture that we have. And the Americas 3.6 to 1 is massive. There's something happening there. There's a reason. And what is that reason? Is it a chemical imbalance that we're all born with, that we're just more likely to commit suicide by that much more than a woman? I don't think so. I mean, gender in and of itself is like a social construct, right? We have certain cultural behaviors that we have imposed on people just because of we start thinking about sex versus gender and whatever else and that whole confusion, but a lot of it is based on like, oh, you have those parts on you, so that means this thing, or you have these certain chromosomes and whatever, and your DNA looks like this, so that's why you're this thing, and this thing means a lot of stuff, and it shouldn't mean almost anything. Like, it just really shouldn't. It's just, yeah, the stats were alarming to me, and stats usually don't mean much to me. In a lot of ways, which is why I don't do research a lot of times. But I knew it was more. I didn't know it was that much more. I really believe that this is a huge reason as to why, because the expectation, because of stoicism, because of man up. I think I've hit all the marks that I really feel like hitting here, that I really need to talk about. I believe, again, that it's an unhealthy practice that we perpetuate in our culture so much, and I believe that it affects everyone negatively, directly and indirectly. And I mean, a man's actions on someone else is going to directly affect them, right? And maybe a man's actions would be because of the environment that he's in, and also he has autonomy and there's personal choices he makes, but our culture doesn't make it any freaking easier at all. I want to talk about, I just want to advertise, I guess. There is a button poetry video that I am going to link here from Guante, who is a spoken word poet amongst a bunch of other things, activist, educator, whatever. And it's called 10 Responses to the Phrase Man Up. I believe that's what it's called. I haven't watched it recently, but I've watched it many times, and it's one of my favorite things ever. It's just wonderful. Like I said, I'm going to leave a link in the description, and at the end of the video, a thumbnail link as well. Take some time to watch it. It's not very long. I feel like it will get you to start thinking about things in a different way. If this hasn't already, but this is done in a very, powerful way. And I think that this is something that people need to consider more often. Again, there's tons and tons of different issues with different types of people all over the place, and I recognize and respect that. I'm just talking about this today because I finally felt like approaching the subject, and I guess I've put it out here, and I brought it in here a little bit. I want to bring it in a little more, and feel like for the first time in years, my mental health has just been at a low, and I don't know what to do about it necessarily. There's times where I feel like there's nothing I can do. That I'm doing the positive things I can do, and I'm refraining from doing negative things that I could do, and I still feel like the positive coping mechanisms aren't enough to handle the amount of stress and anxiety and pressure and everything else that I've been under lately, weight that I've been carrying. So I feel stuck, and that's another reason I wanted to talk about this, because that's where I'm at. That's me being open and expressive. That this is a situation that I don't necessarily know how to handle, and I feel like it would be beneficial to have these conversations with people, with men, with women, with anybody. These are things that affect us all. With that, we will see you on another time.